Well, Genesis 6 verses 1 to 4 is a difficult text. And as we attempt to interpret it, we should be humble because there are different interpretations that have been taken of this text. And I don't think that whatever interpretation we take, I don't think we should be divisive with other Christians in the church or among the people of God. There are three. Genesis 6 says that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, and they chose the daughters of men for themselves as wives, and they married them. So the question is, who are the sons of God that are marrying the daughters of men? Well, there are three different interpretations. One is that the sons of God is a reference to the godly line of Seth. Cain killed Abel, so after Abel died, Adam and Eve had relations, and Seth was born, and Seth carried on the godly faith of Abel. So one idea is that the sons of God are the descendants of Seth, marrying the daughters of men, the ungodly line of Cain. Second interpretation is that the sons of God refers to angels, angelic beings, intermarrying with humans. The third idea is that the sons of God are heroes from the mythical past, tyrant kings. We have stories from the ancient Near East, for example. We have stories of a person by the name of Gilgamesh, and he was part God and part human, and accomplished many mighty feats. So how do we find the right interpretation? The exact expression, sons of God, only occurs 4 or 5 times in the Hebrew Bible. We have one occurrence here in Genesis 6. We have 2 occurrences in the introduction to the book of Job. In the introduction to the book of Job, we see God gathering in his heavenly court, his heavenly assembly, with the angels. The angels are called sons of God there. There's another occurrence in the book of Job, Job chapter 38, where God is challenging Job, and he says, where were you when I created the world? When he created the world, the sons of God sang for joy. So it seems to, it also seems to be a very clear reference to angelic beings.
Welcome to Tomorrow's World Answers, where we answer your questions straight from the Bible. One passage in Genesis, which has resulted in some misinterpretation, has led some to ask, does Genesis teach that angels married human women and had giant offspring? This question arises from misunderstanding of Genesis 6, verses 1 and 2. Now it came to pass, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves of all whom they chose. The meaning of this section of Scripture is much debated, with some concluding that it refers to angelic beings marrying human women and spawning a race of giants. Others in the past have used this passage to foster wrong and racist teachings. The term giant used in this scripture refers to someone of very large size or stature. One question that comes to mind is, can angels create offspring with human women? In Luke chapter 20, Jesus Christ said, they cannot. Jesus replied, the people of this age marry and are given in marriage. But those who are considered worthy of taking part in that age to come, and in the resurrection from the dead, will neither marry nor be given in marriage, and they can no longer die, for they are like angels. Basically, Jesus was saying that spirit beings do not marry and cannot reproduce with humans.
وده الرد الرئيسي على حكاية تزوج الملائكة بالبشر، وإن كان في البعض في الغرب بيقول إن لأ، ده المسيح كان بيقصد على إن ده هيبقى وضع المؤمنين فيما بعد، وإن في فرق بين حالة الملائكة دلوقتي وبعدين، يعني وضع في وقت معين وقت وفضاء معين، وبالتالي بيعتقدوا بزواج الملائكة من البشر في وقتها، وفي نفس الوقت بيعتقدوا بأن والتانيين بيعتقدوا ان لا مستحيل، ان يسوع قطعها ادها قاطعة بانه لا يمكن، لان مش هيبقوا زي الملائكة لا يتزوجون ولا يزوجون.
From a basic reading of this chapter of the Bible, we see that human beings are the focus of the story. Throughout the Bible, physical humans are called in numerous places sons of God, not to be confused with the sections of Scripture that refer to converted Christians who have been given God's Spirit as sons of God. We see this, for example, in Luke 3, verse 38. The son of Enosh, the son of Seth, the son of Adam, the son of God. The two most likely explanations of this, recorded in a number of different commentaries, is that some descendants of Adam departed from the teachings and law of God and developed false pagan practices, yet still claimed to be his followers. Women who married such apostates would have been opposed to God's teaching in doing so, but the wording of the verse indicates they may have been taken against their will. The well-known Haley's Bible commentary provides a second possibility, suggesting that the sons of God were descendants of righteous Seth, some of whom departed from godly instruction to marry women who were descendants of Cain, who had departed from following God's ways, hence multiplying evil in the pre-flood world.
Now let's turn our attention to chapter 6 and a very challenging narrative.
تكوين 6.
Chapter 6 begins, when humans began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them. The sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves, whomever they chose. The fallen ones, or Nephilim, were on the earth in those days, and also after, when the sons of God came into the daughters of humans. And they bore children to them. Those were the mighty ones of old, men of name. Well, let's start with the Hebrew word. The Hebrew word is Nephilim. Who are the Nephilim? Now, if the term Nephilim were used in my Hebrew class, my students would translate it fallen ones.
جاي من الفعل العبري نفل بمعنى سقط، وبالتالي نفيليم مش بالنون بالميم. نفيليم معناها الساقطين او اللي وقعوا، او في التفسير يعني الملائكة التي سقطت من اعلى او من السماء.
Nephilim means fallen ones. Why did the Septuagint translate it gigantes or giants? That's an interesting question. Now in Numbers chapter 13, we'll get there after a while, the 10 scouts compare the large-size Anakites to the Nephilim. Actually, they say the large Anakites are Nephilim. Now the problem in this case is that the narrator of Numbers chapter 13 says that the 10 scouts are giving a bad report, and in that case meaning they are giving an intentional distortion of the facts. So that really raises a question for us, is I understand why the giants from Numbers 13 might be put into Genesis chapter 6 by the Septuagintal translators.
يقصد اللي هم العشرة اللي بعتهم موسى عشان يستكشفوا الأرض، لكن حتة انهم وصفوهم بالعمالقة لان في اجزاء اخرى من الكتاب في الرأي الغربي يعني ان دول اتوصفوا بالعمالقة، وبالتالي هم بيعتقدوا ان دول هم النفيليم او الملائكة الساقطين اللي تزوجوا بالبشر وانجبوا هؤلاء النسل من العمالقة، او اللي بيكون مش شرط عمالقة في الجسم لكن في المكانة اخدوا وضع وبتاع، لانهم يعني خطة شيطانية كانوا بياخدوا مناصب في العالم وبياخدوا أوضاع قوية في العالم. لحد النهاردة الفكر ده موجود في أمريكا وبعض أماكن في الغرب عند البعض، إن القيادات الكبيرة بتبقى من هذه النوعية. في رأي البعض عموما هم في رأيهم إن هم دول نتيجة التزاوج بين الملائكة والسيدات الحسنات في هذا الوقت بحسب النص الكتاب الحرفي، يعني خطتنا حرفية، وبالتالي هو ده الجنس اللي أمر ربنا بإفنائه، وده تفسير ليه النصوص ضدهم صعبة جدا. بيقول أبدهم ودمرهم خالص وافنيهم. طب ازاي ربنا يكون بهذه القسوة مع البشر؟ لا، دول ما كانش بشر، ده كان الجنس المتحور أو الجنس اللي هو اللي ساقط، أو نتيجة التزاوج بين الملائكة الساقطة والجنس البشري، وتنتج منه عنه هؤلاء العمالقة في رأي الغربي. وبالتالي هم دول اللي ربنا أمر بأبادتهم وأنهى، واللي قام بهذا الدور في الآخر خالص كان داوود، وأنهى هذا الجنس بوقتها. عشان كده كان عنيف جدا معهم بحسب أمر ربنا.
But it doesn't seem like a bad report that's intentionally distorted is a good reason to think that there's giants here. Now, when we look at Genesis,
اللي بيعتقدوا وجودهم حتى الآن بيعتقدوا إن هذا الجنس موجود أيضا في قادات العالم، في بعض قواد العالم الآن. ده بقى فكر غربي يعني، وإن عشان كده مش المفروض إنه يتم تغيير الجنس البشري من خلال أي حاجة حديثة ممكن تؤدي إلى تغيير هذا الخليقة البشرية زي ما حصل أيام نوح.
chapter 6:4, we realize that if we read it very literally, like the translation I gave you, the passage characterizes the Nephilim without respect to their size. It says they are mighty heroes, persons of name, we might say persons of reputation from antiquity. Now, they could be large-sized warriors, but not necessarily. They're described here for their might, their prowess, and their fame.
Pop culture is filled with depictions of fallen angels, once holy beings that have succumbed to sin. But how and why did the idea of fallen angels even come about in the first place? Here's the untold truth of fallen angels. Fallen angels are basically angels that have given up on the good and righteous path and turned to evil, right? Well, not necessarily. It's true that Jewish and Christian traditions believe that fallen angels were originally just as holy as any of the other angels, but fell when the most beautiful of them, Lucifer, decided to rebel and enticed others to go with him. But in Hindu traditions, it's a little different. They believe the creator god Brahma actually made some angelic beings good and some evil from the very beginning. Why? Because it's meant to illustrate the natural order of things and balance in the universe. And fallen angels don't even exist in Islam, where tradition says that all angels are good, including the ones tasked with overseeing those whose evil souls have landed them in hell. These angels are lording over hell, yes, but they aren't fallen, as they are still doing divine work. There's another explanation for Satan there too, and it basically says he's not an angel, he's a jinn, a creature made from fire and free will. Put a pin in that because there'll be more about this pesky free will stuff later. Historically, those who believe in fallen angels typically have believed them to be responsible for things like tempting mortals into sin, and fallen angels are tricky about it too, sometimes masquerading as good angels as they torment and tempt. How do believers know all this? Well, these days, most of it comes from the non-canonical book of Enoch, which was written about 350 BC. The text claims to be the revelations of Enoch, who was taken up to heaven and told the universe's deepest secrets, then shown just what would happen during mankind's ultimate judgment. Enoch shows up in other texts as well, which claim he lived to be 365 years old and eventually told his tales to his son, Methuselah, who lived to be an impressive 969 years old. Strangely, even though the stories of Enoch were influenced by the mythology of places like Babylon and in turn influenced Judaism and Christianity, the only place that all 100 chapters of the book survived was Ethiopia. And among those chapters was a fascinating explanation on fallen angels. One of the most widely told tales of fallen angels says it was Lucifer who rebelled against God and brought a bunch of angels down with him. But the story told in the book of Enoch is very, very different. It tells a story of lust. According to the book of Enoch, long before the Great Flood, angels and humans met and mingled pretty commonly, and the inevitable happened: children. Those sons and daughters of angels were a race of 450-foot-tall giants. The angels started teaching their giant offspring evil ways, and God not only imprisoned them, but subjected them to judgment and set the flood to hit the reset button on his creation. Enoch, the story says, tried to speak on behalf of the angels and their giant children, but sadly, a lot of the texts are missing. We do know that Enoch was the one God selected to act as an intermediary to the fallen angels, instructing him to tell them what their punishment would be for their transgressions. They were to be condemned to the ends of the earth, with an eternity of punishment to follow. Early Jewish writers considered Enoch to be a prophet, but when Christianity started to adopt his teachings, he largely fell out of favor with Judaism. Christian writers then took the Book of Enoch with them when they converted isolated areas of Ethiopia in the 4th and 5th centuries. Though the Book of Enoch was lost to the rest of the world, it was preserved in Ethiopia and was finally brought back to Europe in 1773. In the meantime, though, with the Book of Enoch to guide them, Christian scholars and writers had centuries to let their imaginations go wild, leading them to the really convoluted origin of Satan as a fallen angel. See, that's not actually in the Bible, but theologians turned themselves into pretzels trying to explain how Satan exists in the first place. The reasoning went like this. God created everything in the universe, and therefore God created Satan. But the only thing God creates are good things, so therefore Satan must have been good at one point. He also needed to have the free will to turn bad, but since he clearly wasn't human, he must therefore have been a fallen angel. Clearly, these scholars went to the Princess Bride school of logic and reasoning. Studying, you must have learned that.
وطبعا كتاب أخنوخ مش معترف به من معظم الكنائس أو تقريبا كل الكنائس، ويعتبر مش من ضمن الأسفار القانونية الرسمية في ال 66 كتاب المعترف بهم لدى كل المسيحيين.
The last occurrence is in Aramaic in the book of Daniel. When the king looked into the furnace, he saw four people there, and it says that one looked like a son of God, which would mean a divine being, an angelic being. There are only 5 occurrences in the entire Bible where we have the exact expression son of God or sons of God, and it always refers to angelic beings. We must distinguish this use from other places. There are other places in the Bible where they indicate that the relationship of a human to God is like a father-son relationship. So Adam and God have a father-son relationship. In the covenant that God makes with David, God and David have a father-son relationship. But it doesn't actually say that Adam is a son of God. It doesn't use that linguistic expression, and it doesn't say that David is the son of God. So the only time that linguistic expression occurs in the Bible, it always and very clearly refers to angelic beings. We also have the witness of the New Testament. So there are 2 passages in the New Testament that refer to this. One is 2 Peter chapter 2, and the other is the book of Jude. And both of these texts are very closely related to each other. In 2 Peter chapter 2, Peter is talking about how difficult days are coming for the Christians, and there will be people who deny the faith, who deny the truth about Jesus Christ, the truth about his work, who deny the gospel. There will be false teachers, and they will bring corruption into the church and destruction into the church. What Peter does is he appeals to the Old Testament, and he says, well, if God could deliver his faithful people in difficult times in the Old Testament, then he will be able to do it in the New Testament as well. Peter refers to 2 examples in the Old Testament. One is the story of Genesis 6 and Noah, and the other is the story of Lot being rescued from the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. And if you look in the Greek text of 2 Peter, it's very clear that there are 2 examples and not 3 examples by the use of the word and. So if God did not spare the angels who sinned, and he delivered Noah, and he did not spare the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, and he rescued Lot. So there are 2 examples joined by the word and each example has 2 parts, a negative part and a positive part, a negative part and a positive part. So when Peter is talking about the angels who sinned, he's very clearly talking about Genesis chapter 6 because this is connected with the story of Noah. Some people say, well, no, he's not talking about Genesis 6. Well, then my question to them is, if Peter is trying to encourage his readers from well-known stories in the Old Testament, and if the angels who sinned is not Genesis 6, then where else is the story? There is no other story in the Old Testament that it could be referring to. Some people think that it's the fall of Satan, but as we're going to see when we talk about that, there is no story in the Old Testament that describes the fall of Satan. Peter is very clearly alluding to Genesis 6. Jude is doing the same thing, and it's very obvious in the book of Jude, because he's talking about people who are false teachers, people who are going to deny the faith, and he also appeals to the Old Testament and shows how God delivered his people in the past, and he will do so in the future. He also refers to two events. He refers to angels who abandoned their proper dwelling place, their proper home. He also talks about the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. And he says, since they, in the same way as these, committed strange immorality. Well, in the Greek text, the they refers to the angels. And the same way as these, the these refers to the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. So what the story of Genesis 6 has in common with the story of Sodom and Gomorrah is that there's an abnormal form of sexuality going on. If God can deliver his people from even the strangest perversions, then he will deliver the people who are listening to Peter and the people who are listening to Jude. He will deliver us. Now,
Whatever the case, this is speaking of the marriages between human men and human women, and is not inferring in any way of offspring coming from a relationship between angels and humans. To submit a question for the show, email us at twanswers@.
Now, who are the sons of God, and who are the daughters of humans? That is, literally, the Ha-Adam, the human race. Now, some say that the daughters of humans are females from the line of Cain, and the sons of God are males from the line of Seth. Now, where this comes from is, if we remember in Genesis chapter 5, which we looked at in this session, Adam is a son of God, and Seth is a son of Adam. So in that sense, the line of Seth, that's spelled out in chapter 5, they could be the sons of God over and against the daughters of humans from the line of Cain. That's one way to go, and there's some other spins that could go a little bit of a different way. But specifically, the genealogies in Genesis chapter 4 and 5 are thought to maybe line up to these two people, sons of God, daughters of humans. But others say that the sons of God are celestial beings. Sometimes we call them angelic beings. Fallen ones who are perverting the human race by seducing women. Now, although Christian laity often enjoy debating these and other views, one thing that's important for us to recognize is that the upshot in this passage, in either case, is that God saw the wickedness of the human race and decided to kill everyone. Well, almost everyone except Noah. So there's nothing wrong with these debates, but we need to make sure that they don't obscure or eclipse the bigger story of what's happening, whatever the perversion of the human race entails.
Man is mortal, so you would have put the poison as far from yourself as possible, so I can clearly not choose the wine in front of me.
Oh, and once more, there's that free will thing. Don't worry, it'll come up again. According to the book of Enoch, the first batch of fallen angels was each responsible for teaching humanity about a specific sin. As Baal, for example, was responsible for teaching humanity about sex. So thanks very much for that. Tamio, on the other hand, taught humanity about demons and spirits. And then there's Sherne-Haza, who is apparently responsible for that race of giant half-angels. Those giants, if you remember, led to the imprisonment and punishment of the fallen, as well as the Great Flood, which was brought to cleanse earth of their gigantic sins. Perhaps the strangest fallen angel of all, though, was Penimu, who was credited with giving mankind something that led to all kinds of evil, the written language. With writing came knowledge, and that, of course, is really, really bad, because it might lead to free will. The big lesson you're apparently supposed to learn from fallen angels? That knowledge and free will are bad and will get you killed, so the only way to remain safe is to choose ignorance and obedience. Funny how that works. Maybe the biggest aversion the Book of Enoch takes from the regular Bible is its depiction of the Garden of Eden and the fall of mankind. Everyone knows the traditional story from the Bible. A serpent, usually associated with Satan, tempts Eve into eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. There's that whole knowledge is bad thing again. And then boom, goodbye paradise. In the Book of Enoch, though, it's not Satan who tempts Eve. It's a fallen angel named Gadriel. And this is the jerk who also went on to give humanity weapons and armor and teach us all how to kill each other. Sounds like Gadriel has a lot to answer for. Quick, describe a fallen angel. There are probably some scowly faces, bat-like wings, maybe even some horns or cloven hooves, right? Maybe a double chin. Who knows? But it wasn't always like that. In early Christian art, fallen angels looked pretty much the same as their holier counterparts. One of the earliest representations of the idea that there were angels and fallen angels opposing each other in an otherworldly battle is featured in an ancient mosaic in Italy. Jesus is in the middle, and on one side is an angel in red with some sheep representing the home team. On the other side are the bad guys, a figure thought to be Lucifer or Satan, standing with some goats. He's wearing blue, which is the color of the damned, plus he has goats, so we know he's the bad guy. But otherwise, he doesn't seem all that bad. The mosaic even suggests fallen angels kept their iconic halos, which at the time were a symbol of power, not holiness. It wasn't until the Middle Ages that images of fallen angels started turning more grotesque. During that time, something weird happened. Creatures from ancient Babylonian texts called Lilitu began to be associated with Adam's non-canonical first wife, Lilith. At the same time, parallels were drawn between Satan and the ancient Canaanite deity Beelzebub, and the ancient Roman half-goat, half-man god of nature, Pan. In the 14th century, these pop culture influences led Dante to describe Satan as lording over the depths of hell while sporting bat wings, and that in turn influenced the 17th century author John Milton to describe fallen angels in his work Paradise Lost as the sort of grody monsters we think of today.
One might come to me and say, well, Jesus in the Gospels says that the angels in heaven neither marry nor are given in marriage. So it's impossible for an angel to have physical relations with human women. Well, they're not reading the Gospels accurately and clearly, because Jesus is saying that when in the resurrection, when Jesus returns at the end of history, we who are resurrected are not going to marry, because we're going to be like the angels in heaven. Notice he says the angels in heaven, and Jude says they left their proper dwelling place. So there's no contradiction between Jesus and Jude. In heaven, the angels don't marry. In Jude, they abandoned their proper dwelling place and they go to commit strange immorality. So there's no confusion. So it seems very clear. Genesis 6 is telling.
احتمال يكون عايز يقول يعني ان توجد القدرة لكنهم في السماء لا يتزوجون والأشرار هم اللي بيتزوجوا. توجد القدرة لكن غير مستخدمة في السماء، حسب يعني ما ممكن يكون ده قصده.
Telling us that these are angels who are marrying humans, and Jude and Peter are telling us that is the correct interpretation. The next piece is, who are the Nephilim? In verse 4 of Genesis 6, it says, the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God had relations with human women, and they bore children of them. End of sentence. New sentence. They were the heroes who were from the ancient past, men of renown. There's two major sentences there. First one says, the Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterward. There are two possible interpretations of this expression, they were on the earth in those days and afterward. What does that mean, they were there in those days and afterward? Well, some people think this means that the Nephilim were the children that came from the angels who married the women in Genesis 6, verses 1 to 3, and that the Nephilim were the product of these unnatural unions, and they appealed to texts from the 3rd century BC and 2nd century BC, the so-called Enochic traditions, the traditions about Enoch, where the Nephilim are interpreted as giants. There's another interpretation that's possible. When it says the Nephilim were there in those days and also afterward, it could mean that before the angels had sex with the human women, the Nephilim were there, and they were also there after the angels had sex with women. So it could mean that the Nephilim had nothing to do with the angels marrying the humans. I think that is the correct interpretation for 2 reasons. First of all, I examined every occurrence of this expression and also afterward. I went to the Hebrew Bible, I looked up every occurrence of this phrase, and I examined how it was used. And the second interpretation best fits and suits how this word is used. So when it says they were there in those days and also afterward, it means the Nephilim were there before angels cohabited with humans, and they were there after angels cohabited with humans. There's
who turn themselves inside out trying to explain how Satan existed, well, they faced the same issue with the rest of the fallen angels and came up with some typically convoluted explanations. Until the 12th century, pride was the typical answer as to why fallen angels fell, but that meant God would have had to create something with a crippling, all-powerful amount of pride, and that didn't fly. So scholars came up with the idea that angels had been created with a natural love that allowed them to love God, themselves, and each other. It's the last part that scholars in the Middle Ages believe caused the fall of the angels. After Lucifer fell because his love was a selfish love of power, the other angels who fell did so because they loved Lucifer. God was largely an absent, distant figure after all, and Lucifer was their friend. Rather than condemning themselves to struggle for the acceptance of an unreachable father, perhaps they followed their brother into exile.
There's a second reason why this is the correct interpretation. The last sentence says they were the heroes who were from the ancient past, the men of renown. This sentence does not begin with and. Now that's very, very important. Almost every sentence in the Hebrew Bible begins with and. When a sentence does not begin with and, it does so for 2 reasons. It could be because it's beginning a new section, or secondly, because it's making a comment on the previous sentence, what we would call a footnote. It's very clear that this sentence is not beginning a new section, but it's acting like a footnote on the previous sentence. So the previous sentence is saying that the Nephilim were there before the angels and the humans cohabited, and they were there after. And it's making a brief comment that they were the ancient heroes. In this case, what Moses is doing is he's demythologizing the Nephilim. You notice, one of the things that we should notice is the text doesn't tell us who the Nephilim were. What does that mean? Why doesn't the text tell us who they were? Because they were well known to the first readers of this text. The first readers of this text knew who the Nephilim were and didn't need that explained to them. And all Moses is saying is, look, whoever you think these heroes are, like Gilgamesh, these ancient heroes, these men of renown, you've read about them in the ancient mythologies. Whoever they were, they're not part of this story. They don't come from the cohabitation of angels and humans. And I think that's the correct interpretation. But the problem is, this has been a difficult text to interpret. And it has not always been interpreted correctly down through the centuries. And in the 3rd century BC and the 2nd century BC, they came to an incorrect interpretation. They thought that the Nephilim were giants who were produced by angels cohabiting with humans. And this got into the book of Enoch. And Paul warns his readers against this because he says in his letters to Timothy, don't argue over endless genealogies and foolish myths. This is a direct reference to the book of Enoch, which has a long genealogy of all the angels until you finally come down to Satan, and then they blame all the evil in the world on Satan. What they're trying to do is they're trying to blame chaos and death and evil in the world on angelic sin, instead of blaming it on human sin. And the Bible clearly puts the blame on humans. Genesis 3 shows how sin came into the world. How did we live in a world that is troubled by chaos, by death, by evil, by sin, by selfishness, by all kinds of corruption? That came about because God made a covenant with the first humans, and they broke that covenant. They were fickle, they were disloyal, they were unfaithful, they cheated on God in the relationship, and they rebelled against him. And so when Jude quotes and refers to this material, he's showing that the sin is in the world because of human rebellion, not because of angelic